Well, hi. Today we're with Rupert Soskin from
Hello,
Megalithic
everybody.
Chat. Hi, Rupert. You okay?
I'm all right.
Yeah, well, we've been mates for quite a few years now, haven't we?
We have.
We
Yeah,
have.
we have. Yeah, so this is probably going to be about as informal an interview as anything ever gets,
It's
isn't
going to
it?
be like one of our usual chats, isn't it, really? Now, we actually met when we got invited to a castle for dinner, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah, it's not something that happens to me every day. Or
It probably
before.
happens to me a bit more often than you.
Yeah, they got more castles. Yeah.
I have to say, folks, not because I'm a friend of royalty or anything, but just I live down in the south of France, and chateaus are just they're 10 a penny down
Ten
here.
a penny, yeah. The
Yeah.
Cathars. You don't really get involved in the whole Cathar thing, do you? As I do.
No, I mean you extend much more into history than I do, don't you?
Yeah,
So I do specialize in prehistory. Mike Bott and I with the prehistory guys. That's what we are. So prehistory.
absolutely, yeah.
It's the
So
name
maybe
on
we
the
should
tin.
we should start with that. Yeah, the prehistory guys, and of course, you started off with that book. Was it Hanging Around with Rocks? Was it called?
That's the one. That's
Standing
the
with
one. Yeah,
Stones. So there was the
yeah.
documentary, which was fantastic, and the lovely book as well.
Thank you. Well, yeah. I mean that it seems so long ago now. I mean, Mike and I started working together. Heavens above, it's over 20 years ago, and then Standing with Stones eventually came out. The original plan was we were going to make a film for the BBC, and then we realised that we would lose control of it. We'd have
Yeah,
producers telling us how we had to do it and what have you. So we went off and did it on our own because we just knew how we wanted it to be, and it took us quite a long time, and it came out in oh god, was it 2007? I think it came out,
that's quite a while
and
ago.
uh,
Yeah.
and then I did the book after that. So the book came out in 2009.
So did you do all the
um,
photos in the book then?
yeah, the funny thing is, I mean,
Fantastic. Yeah.
photographically it's all right. It's not brilliant. The trouble is that we were I did 99% of the photography was done while we were out filming.
Yeah,
So whatever weather we got, that's what I was shooting, and
that's what it
sometimes it
was.
was just appalling.
But
And
you,
also, this is all pre-digital, and so that it was all shot on slide film.
oh, right.
And my publishers, Thames and Hudson at the time, uh, they would not let authors do their own photography, even though or process their own photography, even though I was far more experienced at it than
Well, you're a
their
professional
repo house.
photographer, aren't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they insisted and they did it, and frankly, it could have been better, but it's I mean, the book was well received, so yeah. Um,
Yeah,
but since
fantastic.
then, I mean, Mike and I, we went off and did other things because my day job was, and to a degree still is, but my day job was really nature photography and natural history,
Yeah, yeah,
and Mike was an actor. And so, we finished this utterly exhausted from because it was a hell of a,
Do you know that
mission.
thing about that your trip there? It's every guy's dream, really, isn't it? Getting in the
Yeah,
car or getting in the your Land Rover and
yeah,
just setting off,
yeah,
stopping overnight, filming somewhere, going on to somewhere else.
yeah.
Schoolboy
It
dream,
was
absolute dream.
it. I mean, it. Don't get me wrong. We had the best time
I
making
bet,
it. We're
yeah,
great friends. We're great friends, Mike and I. And we did. We had the best time, but we were working like dogs all the
yeah.
time, and so it was actually uh, on the road because the film's 2.25 hours, and we visit 100 sites roughly, just over 100 sites, I think it is, and we did it in 3 trips. So the longest time that we
Oh
were
right,
away was we were on the road for about 5.5, 6 weeks, something like
wow.
that. And what happened a lot was there were sites in the film that neither of us had visited before, and and I had researched and written the script. This is what I'm going to say.
Before you actually saw the site.
So a huge amount of research had gone into it.
Yeah.
And Mike and I would arrive at a site to recce it before filming, and it would be like, well, that's not what it says in the books. And there were so many cases where what had happened was an archaeologist had written something 80 years ago.
Yeah.
And everybody else had copied what they had written.
Sturkley said here in 1725.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what was happening pretty much all the time was that we would get to a site and recce it, and I would go back to we were traveling around in my Land Rover, and we'd got a camper van that we were using as our mobile hotel and office.
Oh, right. Okay.
Camping our way around the British Isles.
Cool.
And so what would happen a lot of the time would be that we'd get there, we'd look at a place, and then I'd go back to the camper van and I'd sit there and rewrite the script.
Rewrite the whole thing, yeah.
So what was happening was we were up every day. We were up before sunrise in case it was a good sunrise to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would be filming all day or driving all day, and then more research and writing in the evening. So we worked the full time that we were on the road. We were getting about 4 or 5 hours sleep a night.
No, so not just a jolly then, really. No.
So it was, but I mean, we drank some very good beer throughout Britain and Ireland, and we had an absolute blast. So. We probably won't make another film quite like that.
No, it just takes a whole block of time, doesn't it? A lot of hard work. Were you thinking of doing? You say a European one? You said.
Well, I mean, people have asked us over and over and over if we're going to do another feature-length film. We're certainly doing more documentary length films. Next year we've got a couple of probably hour-long films scheduled. In terms of a feature-length film like Standing with Stones, we might, but the thing is that we promised our wives that we would never do it again without proper funding.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. Funding's always the thing, yeah.
The thing is, it costs so much money to do these things, and to be able to devote the time to all the research and writing up front, and then all the recceing and filming, and then Standing with Stones, for example, took Mike about 9 months of solid editing, and because he wrote the music as well. It was a solid 9 months of post-production, so you're talking about 2 years work.
Yeah. So you need to have 2 years income as well, don't you?
Exactly. We promised our wives we wouldn't do it again without proper funding, because we made Standing with Stones on a shoestring, but being absolutely fussy. We're very fussy that the quality of our output is, it's as good as.
And it really is. It really is top quality, isn't it? Yeah.
We're fussy about that because, otherwise, what you're trying to do, so when we have a couple of major things planned, then we'll probably put it up for crowdfunding.
Right.
As funding it independently from our other activities.
So nothing exactly ready yet, just ideas forming. And
I would like to do a Europe version of Standing with Stones, but it would probably be. It would easily be 2 years' work.
Wow.
So. Yeah, well,
that's what I do. I travel around the ancient Europe all the time. Well, I did travel around Europe all the time on the ancient sites.
I look at what you're doing all the time. When you're out and about, and you've got all your different trips coming up. And I was saying, do you know what? I really wish I had the time to
Oh
just
yeah.
come and join you, because you get to
That'd
see
be
some
wonderful.
pretty special places, don't you?
Oh, fantastic. Whenever you want to come, just give me a bell. So I'm coming. Have you got a spare seat in the minibus? So just jump in. Yeah.
No, it would be really nice to do that, because I mean, I've never been to Malta, for example.
Oh wow. Oh my
Yeah,
God. I'll have to take you around the sites of Malta.
yeah,
I
we
shall have
should
to
do
do
that.
that. Oh,
We
it's
should
they're
do that.
unbelievable.
Yeah, it
They're
would be a bit
absolutely
of
amazing.
a boy's day out, wouldn't it? Really, I mean,
Well, yeah, nothing wrong with that. I'll have a few days out, yeah.
no, you're right. There's
And a
nothing wrong
couple of bottles of wine in the evening, and it sounds
with
good to me.
Yeah.
But I was gonna, what was it? I was gonna link that to site. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah. So you've not really got anything in the way of tours planned, but you have got, or films, but you have got a book on the way.
I am working on the next book, which is okay. Well, one of the things that has always been an issue for me is archaeology to the public domain. All you ever hear about is when anybody finds something new, it's a temple.
Yeah.
It's just an assumption and a presumption that temples were everywhere, and I find it absurd that when you look at people, look at humans, look at the way we've been throughout history, that we're constantly talking about how good it is that we no longer do whatever, whether it's, we no longer do bear baiting, or in the town square, we no longer do public executions or public floggings. We think it's great that that we're improving as we move forwards in time. And yet there's this romantic notion that you go back 5,000 years and they had temples everywhere and was sweetness and light. It's completely stupid.
It doesn't ring true at all, does it? No.
It's just wrong. And so looking at sites and what the different types of sites, what could they have been for? Because day-to-day existence would have been a much harder thing. All the things that we take for granted, you want to cut a tree down, we go out with a chainsaw and cut a tree down. How long does it take to cut down, when you think of places like, whether it's Durrington Walls or Stanton Drew, you look at Stanton Drew, where you had those concentric rings of posts.
Yeah.
Those trees were a meter in diameter.
And all they've got
that's
is
a
stone axe,
500-year-old tree, and there were 9 concentric rings of them. Well, if you've got a stone axe, and that's basically what you're using to cut down, I mean, there's no evidence to support this. I do wonder if they had a number of other methods, including, I mean, for example, if you had some really, really strong cordage, and if you put just sand and water,
there's some sort of technology that it seems to have disappeared, but that's like through all the sites, isn't it? You think throughout the world, really, how on earth did they do that? But the amount of man hours as well that it's taken to.
Do you know what? I think that's one of the most important things that we can sort of reassess, because we've developed over the last couple of centuries, really. We've become this industrially based people who everything is about how quickly can you do it, how much is it going to cost. Whereas back then it was a thing of, if a thing is worth doing, it didn't matter how long it took, probably, or how many men were involved in actually doing it. That, I mean, obviously there would have been some parameters that would have been important, but generally speaking, we need to stop looking at the past with modern eyes.
Yeah, that's the big thing. It's very difficult to do, because then you've got to know which eyes to look through, haven't you?
Absolutely. But I think if you drop away the assumptions, so you know, a good example is making a flint axe or an axe head, for example, that you know, you get a really proficient napper, and you know, I've seen an axe head made from start to finish in 20 minutes. So that's from big flint nodule down to perfectly usable axe head. Now all you've got to do is put it in the handle. If you know, because we look at making stone artifacts as being something difficult, and the reality is hugely skilled, yes, but in the hands of a craftsman, you can just do that. You know what you're doing. 20 minutes, and that completely changes your you know, your impression of what would have been possible in the past. And
like just stone circles, I mean, the amount of workmanship and talent that must have gone into making, if they shape the stone, as people say they do, some people think they do, some people think they didn't, but the amount of work, do you think there was a group of people like who went around doing it, making them? Because, like, you know, if you go to Macrimur on Arran in Scotland, there's loads of different stone circles, all of different types. And I can't help thinking when I go up there, it's a showroom.
Do you know what? Yeah, because the thing is, when you say stuff like that, people think you're joking.
Yeah, but
which we kind of are.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with you. You see, one of the things that I've you know, that I say a lot is like the only thing that I can really equate it to today is piano removal men.
Yeah,
when you try to move a piano,
Laurel and Hardy,
and it's exactly that. Whereas you get professionals in to do the job, and two guys will throw that piano around, and you know, and fling it up the stairs and what have you, and they'll have it, you know, where you want it in no time at all because they know how to do it. And I think that if you've got an average community, so take, for want of a better word, a village back in the day, so it's probably going to have about 100 people living in the settlement, and I don't think necessarily in that settlement you'd have the megalith builders, you'd have the flint knappers and all that. I think that there would have been a group of people who traveled to work a project.
So you'd nip up to Macrimur and say, I'll have a number 3, and can I have a number 1 for down the bottom of the hill? And
and I've always said this about Karnak. You know, you look at Karnak in Brittany, where you look at these rows and rows and rows of stones, and do you know what? And I'm half joking, but only half joking, that I think people could have walked down there, and you know, and they could, do you know, I'll have that one. Can you deliver it next Tuesday?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
there's one there for everybody, isn't there? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, because the thing is, you look at, and again, it's looking at things with modern eyes. That we look at moving megaliths as something, you know, mystical. How did they do that? So enigmatic. And people come up with these ridiculous notions of. In fact, I even saw a comment really made me laugh on a YouTube thing recently, where somebody had actually commented, people can't move stones that big. It's far more likely that it was levitation or something similar. It's far more likely that it was levitation.
Not exactly Chauvis's cat.
Of course it is. But you know, if you had a group of people who knew how to move things around, there's a guy in Michigan, Wally Wallington, who he's an ex-engineer, and he just knows how to. He thinks outside the box, and he started doing all sorts of things. He put up a Stonehenge trilithon in his backyard, on his own. He's got
Wow.
these however many ton blocks he used concrete blocks, easier to get hold of, and these enormous blocks that just through clever leverage. And we look at things as difficult because we can't do it ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And sometimes it just needs clever engineering thought to completely show how false that idea is. They found there was some interesting research done in Bulgaria over the last year and the year before, where they'd found that I say Bulgaria, might have been Hungary, Eastern Europe anyway. And they were analyzing cattle ankle bones, and they found that there was a growth on a pattern of growth on these ankle bones that only happens with consistent pressure and wear over and above the body weight of an animal itself. It's like,
So they
what
were
it's like.
pulling something very, very heavy.
They were pulling weights. That's
Yeah.
and the thing is that this is from a time, I don't actually remember the dates. I'm terrible at remembering dates. But this is pre actual farming. These animals were being used for traction and load bearing. So for me, that says, as clearly as you're going to find, that says, well, they were using them to drag, whether it was big timbers or stones. Now, it makes far more sense when you think, people talk about how many men would it take to drag this, or what technique did they use to drag this. Far more likely that they just harnessed up a team of 20 cattle, and dragged them. Far more likely.
Straight into the hole.
Yeah. So the evidence is there that that they were using that in, as I said, in Eastern Europe. There were a couple of cases where they found similar patterns of bone growth in Syria. But what nobody has done yet is go around all the boxes of excavations in museums all over the place to look at other cattle bones that have been excavated in different sites to see if it matches up over a wider area. I suspect it will.
That's an interesting idea. That's good, isn't it? Because people usually just look at the orthodox history or prehistory, or somebody said this, or somebody said they've got the PhD in through a certain theory, and that never shifts. And the datings are the same, aren't they? Because I don't know what you think about that, because I remember Malta again. I think they only said there was only ever 2 radiocarbon dates, and they fixed the whole of the time structure. So it's pretty much, and it was done through that and recognizing pottery that could have come from Syria. So I do wonder whether these time periods we've got, sort of Paleolithic, Neolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age.
It is an interesting one. I think that one of the things that's changing, up until certainly say the last 50 years, archaeology was much more of an art than a science. It was an interpretive discipline. So people were looking at whatever remains they'd excavated and doing their best to interpret what that actually meant. It's only in the last 50 years-ish, that certainly we've had C14 dating. Well, carbon dating has made a massive difference to everything. But more recently, we've had all the isotope techniques. So you can, you can scrape the inside of a ceramic pot, or even if it's broken, scrape the inner surface of a ceramic fragment, and you can tell what was in the pot. And they can usually date what was in the pot. And that's just one of the techniques. Strontium, where they can actually tell from teeth and bones where it's most likely that cow came from, or where those people came from. So they excavate a body from, wherever the burial is, and they find that actually they, there's the egg-fed girl, for example, in Denmark, who, that she came from southern Germany, and they can only tell that from isotopic analysis.
Then we've got the I saw there's the levels, but we know that sites were used by different generations, hundreds and thousands of years apart. So how do we know? How can we go right back to the beginning and say this stone circle was built at this time, even though somebody might find some pottery from 1,000 years later?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, generally speaking, the only way stone circles can be reliably dated is, well, it comes from the sites that have been restored, because it's only when a stone has fallen down that you can take some of what's underneath the stone and date that, so that that's when the stone was actually put on top of it. If you find, say, pollen grains in the soil underneath it, so you can date those, and that's when they then put the stone back up. So it's to restore the site. It's never going to happen that you don't get excavations at stone circles that are still intact, because you're not going to get anything from that. People didn't live there. That's one of the things that that you really have to take on board, is that people did not live at stone circles. So you're not going to find very much. Archaeologists are not looking for the artifacts. The media are very good at saying, they found this pot, or they found this sword, or they found this jewelry. That's not what archaeologists are looking for. They're trying to provide or gather a better body of knowledge with which you can piece together the jigsaw pieces of what was society actually like, to give a better understanding of human history. It's not about the artifact. So dating itself, a lot of sites are dated through typology. So, for example, they can say they know that Castlerig is amongst the oldest stone circle, which goes back. Do you know what? I can never remember.
They say 3,500 BC.
BC. So you're talking about 5,500-year-old site. Now, the rollright stones in Oxfordshire have been given the same date, approximately, purely on the basis of them being structurally similar.
Yeah.
So and it was Aubrey Burle, all hail, but it was Aubrey Burle who first put that idea forwards, where he'd seen that the rationale, if you like, behind the construction of the circle matched that, and he said that, and everybody has said that since, but it's never been excavated.
So we just don't know really.
We don't really know.
There's all the alignments as well, aren't there? Now, I'm not a big one for alignments. Now, Castlerig, you've probably seen how every single possible connection is lined up with the second rising of the moon at the solstice, and all these different, all the way around or something. Yeah, it just gets me that if you've got a circle with loads and loads of stones on it, they're all going to point to.
I couldn't agree with you more. I absolutely agree with you. I think that when you get sites like Callanish in the Hebrides on Lewis, there's Callanish, we absolutely know 100% was an astronomical site. The way it relates to the moon through its cycle. The same with the recumbent stone circles in Aberdeenshire, that once again, they're aligned so that the moon appears to roll along the altar stone just at the at the end of its 18.6-year cycle, and that's the only time that it happens. But other than that, the other sites, I was looking recently at Karnak in Brittany, and the amount of work that has been done on seeing what the alignments are. And I'll be honest, I haven't read a huge amount about it, so I might be being unreasonable in saying this, but people have done these things like, well, if you take this stone or this gap, and then you align it with that stone way down there, so you've got the third one in the line here and the 15th one along the line there. That's going to line up with such and such. You think, well, yeah, but you can do that with
just if you could have been
you make a line, it's going to point at something.
Of course it is, and the stones are all facing different. The different sites in Karnak are facing all different directions. We only see the 3 in a row, don't we, usually? But there's so many other sites all over the place that are doing all sorts of different things.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that they don't exist. I just don't think that. I don't think we learn anything from that. I think that we can accept that our ancestors were a hell of a lot more savvy than maybe they're given credit for. But it doesn't tell us any more about them to establish that this site aligns with whatever.
Yeah, and there's enough on Karnak that I've seen all this angle thing moves onto that angle and it clipped and all these sort of things. But okay, they knew about maths, but it doesn't really tell you what it's for, does it? It's like saying I've got a Ford Escort and the engine does this, but it doesn't really matter. You don't need to be a mechanic to drive a car. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely it does. Yes, nor does it tell you whether you use your car to go to work or to go to the cinema
or a minibus to take people around ancient sites.
Exactly. So I think we need to be a lot more sort of open-minded about how we interpret these things. It's like I was saying earlier on. It's about we keep calling things temples. Stop calling things temples. I've spent partly because of the book project. That I have spent an enormous amount of time trying to say, see, it's all very well for me to say these aren't temples, and it's a hypothesis that Mike and I have been developing for some years. And it's all very well for us to say these aren't temples. But if we're going to say that, well, clearly there must have been temples. So we're kind of duty bound to say, well, what do we think are the temples? If we're going to argue that, where are the temples? And there are different ways of tackling that that problem. One of them is there's a very well-known archaeologist, Richard Bradley. Now, Richard's stance on this is he thinks, particularly when you go back into earlier prehistory, that it's far more likely that natural sites were temples. So, if it was more a shamanistic culture than sort of the orthodox religions that we have, in more recent history, that if it was shamanistic, then you might meet in the grove for this ceremony, or you might meet by
the rocky outcrop.
Or or the biggest tree, or the tree that was struck by lightning, or
I was the way I kind of saw it is, I must say it's right. Just a thought the old Gorseths, or the throne that they would have like a huge rocky outcrop, and maybe have somebody your shaman or whatever. It could, or even your local councillor telling you what they're going to lock down next or whatever.
Absolutely.
And then later on, because have you noticed that there's always quite often a stone circle near a rock like that? So it's as if to say, well, that started, because there's many places I can think of. Even Brinkelly is there's a massive rocky outcrop which is known as the throne, or the Gorseth next to it. So maybe they started off doing that, and or even meeting at places where tracks meet or waterfalls, whatever, and or the old oak, and then built later on.
Yeah.
A man-made site next to it.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
they learned how to.
Well, do you know, one of the things that came up in the research was they fairly recently excavated, this is in Israel, there's a site called Tel Arad, and they've been excavating there for a long time. But recently they turned up, and you can only call it a shrine or a temple, because they uncovered two, they called them altars. You could call them altars, but they're certainly plinths, small altars, put it that way. The thing is that, and again, it's only because of modern tech that through chemical analysis, they could say that on one of them, they had burnt frankincense.
Yeah, so that was a definite.
And on the other one, they had burnt cannabis mixed with dung, animal dung. Now that's clever, because if you mix it with animal dung, not sure what it would have smelt like, but if you mix it with animal dung, it will burn at a much lower temperature. Yeah. So that must have created a lot of smoke. They must have been high as kites.
Is that where the phrase "good shit" comes from?
but the point is, though, that that is almost the only instance that I know of where you can genuinely look at an excavation and say, yes, that's a temple. Everything else, it's supposition. You know, there's in Ireland, there are places where they say categorically, we know that this is religious in origin. But the point is, all of that relates to the Iron Age, and you can't take something from the Iron Age and say that that applies to the Neolithic 3,000, 4,000 years before.
No, of course you can't, or even before that. If you're talking about the Gorseth idea, I was saying that's even before the Neolithic, isn't it? So. So I suppose what we're saying really is you can't say that a site had a particular purpose, because we have on our high street now we've got booths, and we've got maybe a later down there you've got a doctor's surgery, and then you've got the moot or the village hall, then you've got a church. Well, they just probably had the one. We'll meet you at the circle.
But I think that when you look at any settlement, really, as a small version of our modern towns, that what you say is absolutely right, that you need a bit of everything there, and I think you can take it a bit further than that, and look at something like take the church hall, where everything goes on at the church hall. The church, church people will meet there to discuss what's going on at Harvest Festival or something.
But
then the day after they might be calling bingo, and the day after that there might be one of the local bands practicing in there.
Absolutely.
Or the Cubs might be, or the Girl Guides might be in there. It's a meeting place. It's a meeting place for everything.
This has led me on to something. So I've always seen, you probably disagree with me, but I've always seen dolmens or chamber tombs as some sort of religious place, Okay, I'm not finished. I know you're going to disagree with me, so I'm going to finish.
No, not necessarily.
Okay, right. So, and then you've got a lot of places where I've seen there's been stone avenues, whether they're there now or they used to be, like Shap, for instance, and they'll end up at a stone circle. So now I remember when I was young, the church just down the road here would have the Harvest Queen every year, and then we'd get on to the back of lorries and things with a flat top, and we'd drive around and we'd end up at the village hall, right?
Yeah.
So you obviously see what I'm saying. A celebration of some sort at the chambered tomb, process down the stone avenue to have a party at the stone circle or the henge stone circle.
Yeah. Absolutely. Why not? Again, trying to think of a good example here. Let's take somewhere like Wayland Smithy.
You haven't disagreed with me about the
No, I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
Okay, right.
Genuinely not. In fact, what I'm going to say is along the same lines as you. That Wayland Smithy, it contained the remains of about 14 people, all of whom had died around the same time, and yet the site itself was used and reused over reasonably long period of time. So the inference being that the site was created because of, maybe it was a family. They haven't done DNA analysis on them, but maybe it was a family. Maybe it was people who had been, well, whatever. They'd been important for something. So this big site was made. And that clearly made it an important place. And it was used for a long period of time that, whether it was a center of religion, whether, don't know. But the point is that the burials there all came from one small period of time, even though the site was reused over a long period of time. So, it's what makes the initial importance. Don't know.
So, Castle Rig, 3,500 BC, Bronze Age burials in it.
It's an interesting thing, that, isn't it? That what is the name of? There's a recumbent stone circle in Aberdeenshire. Lochnavery. It's something like that. That's not quite right. Oh, I should remember. Anyway, the point is that burials there. The most recent burial happened there in about 1635.
Wow, great.
Okay. Now, the point there really is that we actually have no idea what the site was originally built for, other than the fact that it's a recumbent stone circle, so it relates to the lunar transit. But we don't know whether it was, we don't know. Other than that, the modern churches are still aligned east-west. When, we don't have sun worship as such. It's just a convention. And so we don't really know what the site was put there for. But what we can say, from the fact that there was a burial put there in the, in the 17th century, that people still associate sites with that sort of reverence.
Well, you've got
so talking about Bronze Age. Well, talking about Bronze Age burials in a Neolithic site. Maybe that is what the site was for. Maybe it's the people from 2,000 years on in history. Maybe they're the same as we are today with the old sites, that they had no idea why the Neolithic people put them there, but that's what they thought. You've also got the flip side of all of that, in that we, certainly the Western developed world, we have this thing about burials where, we put people in cemeteries or, whatever. But there are various cultures around the world where when somebody dies, they're buried in their house. Certainly the Tairona civilization in Colombia and their descendants, the Kogi Indians, who I spent a chunk of time with, that your house was your house. Okay, they'd rebuild their houses because they're wood and mud and grass huts. So they'd rebuild them every few years, but your hut was your hut. And so when somebody died, they were often buried in the floor of their house, and the families would carry on living there. But it's like,
are you saying that maybe people lived in dolmens?
No, I'm not saying that. No, I wasn't talking about dolmens. I was thinking about there are so many instances where there are burials in enclosures, and it's not that the enclosures, and by that I'm talking about whether it's palisaded enclosures or causewayed enclosures, what have you, that it's not that you're saying that it's a cemetery. It's just that that was their place. I mean, even if it was a farm, but it was his farm, why bury him somewhere else? It's his place. Let him stay at home.
Well, on the other hand, you've got cathedrals in Britain with lots of people buried in them, but they aren't graves either.
Do you know what? It's a funny thing, isn't it? When you were growing up, were you told never to walk on graves?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. But you walk up the aisle of a church.
There's people buried underneath.
There's people buried underneath. You have no option but to walk across them. Yeah. I mean, I think that comes down to the same rules as keep your elbows off the table. It's just stupid. That's just your mum telling you not to do something because her mum told
on the cracks. I suppose when it's outside, you can see them, and it's obvious, but you can't see the ones underneath it. But they were, I suppose so they were the people that are buried in the cathedrals in church. They're like important people of the area, aren't they? The Lord of the Manor will have his own little crypt underneath there.
Yeah.
So maybe those little Bronze Age burials in Castle Rig, maybe they were just the lords of the time, or the people.
I think that's the common practice throughout prehistory. That I mean, for example, you look at any of the larger settlements, and we know that they must have been home to thousands of people, and yet the local burials will always be, there's depending on the period. We got into individual burials in the Bronze Age as opposed to the mass burial, and so it was only the elite who were buried in tombs. That even if you excavate a long barrow, for example, and you find that it might have contained a dozen individuals, say, so that really can only have been the ruling elite, or or whoever the priests were.
We don't know. Percentage.
It's a tiny percentage, and so one of the things that you can say with reasonable certainty is that we were probably cremating people and just putting their ashes into the soil. We certainly know that was something that happened in more recent history, that or even more recent prehistory, that you would get rid of remains and then work them into the soil as good compost and fertilizer, apart from anything else. I saw a very interesting documentary only a couple of nights ago that was actually about a slave ship that had gone down in the Caribbean, and completely irrelevant from a prehistorical point of view. What was interesting about this was that in Rio, they had a practice with slavery that when people died, they started off originally trying to give people individual graves. But eventually, so many of them were dying that they just started tossing them into mass graves. And over time, this kind of callous disregard, people started throwing their rubbish in as well. And it got to the point where it stank so bad that they just set light to the whole thing and burnt it all to get rid of the stench. Now, this is 17 something. Now, the thing is that we have always got this thought about ritual cremation and what have you. You think, well, hold on, maybe they were burning people back then because, you've got rotting bodies. It's the stench.
It's a possibility, isn't it?
And it does make you wonder if, the whole thing about cremation actually arose because it was a way of dealing with stench.
Mass loads of people. You can't excarnate 1,000 people, can you?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be a pleasant job. It wouldn't be a pleasant job. No, it's...
So that would smell, wouldn't it? It would, yeah.
Do you know, I think something that it's never talked about, and it always makes me chuckle, that again, we take personal hygiene for granted these days.
Yeah.
And if somebody is dirty, you know, you walk past someone in the supermarket who really could do with a good wash, we don't like it at all. But you go back through history, you think, I mean, even walking into a tavern, walking into a tavern in the 14th century, God, can you imagine the stench?
Well, all the sewerage was pouring down the street outside, wasn't it?
So, you know, so that's normal for you. You were probably fairly immune to most stenches. So going back further and further and further into prehistory, where, all right, you haven't got the huge communities that would be creating, you know, a level of sewage that is just unbearable. But you would still have this kind of level of perfume. That probably would have been.
It would have stunk,
pretty intense. So yeah, I think that burning probably had multiple purposes.
One more thing. It's the whole dolmen thing, right? I could never. When I've been driving around 20 odd years now doing those, but I can't work out dolmens, right? I can't work them out. Cromlechs, quoits, all over Europe, all supposedly, all exactly, all pretty much the same design. Which is before chamber. They're not really chambered tombs. Well, even the chambered tombs as well, yeah. All over Europe, all different dates, all the same design. When did they start making them? Because like in Malta, they're supposed to have come after the temples, and then you have some here that they say before the stone circles. And it doesn't. Have you got any time period or any theory about when they started making them and why they're all the same? That was a big one, isn't it?
It is. It's a big one because the thing is that megalithic culture, we know megalith culture itself spread from northern France. And
seeing that now, aren't they? Yeah.
It's basically the main body of that research was basically a Swedish archaeologist, Bettina Schultz-Paulsen.
Yeah.
She was the first person to bring all the data together and and go through it all using a.
Yeah, she's very, very good, isn't she?
Yeah. And obviously there are still people who disagree with her, largely because people don't like change. But
I'm glad you mentioned it because it is important. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, no, her work has been quite remarkable, actually. So you can see how the spread of megalithic culture originated in northern France and spread out in all directions. So you've got sites that might be similar in Britain or Cornwall, for example. If you're going to look at the similarity of thought between places like Newgrange in Ireland and El Romeral in southern Spain, there are clear similarities.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the constructional thought process. Now, we know that if you're going to look at burial sites in Britain, that Cauldron in southeast England, in Kent, is the oldest megalithic burial in Britain that we know of, and that is, help me out here because I'm again terrible at remembering dates.
I've never been to that one.
I think it's 4,900 BC.
Wow,
I think that's the date. You can probably correct me on that. It's old.
So that's nearly 5,000 BC.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now.
That was before the Earth was made.
Have I got that right? It might be 3,900. Anyway, it's old.
Yeah, like me.
Now, the thing is that you say all over Europe,
Yeah.
but dolmens are all over the world.
Over the world, really. Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. Yeah.
there's dolmens. In fact, there's a dolmen in China, and now I don't remember its name. That it's exactly the same as Pulnabrone in Ireland. You know,
So how do we explain that?
Well,
So that hasn't started in northern France, has it?
Maybe.
Or has it?
Maybe
You see my problem?
we can't we can't say anything for certain, except that there are dolmens of the same essential design in China, in Taiwan, in Korea. Now, as you said, all over Europe as well. Now, the thing is that if you look at the dolmens in the Far East and in India, there's an awful lot in India, and they seem to be later. So we've got dolmens, we've got Neolithic dolmens. But you won't find any Neolithic when you go to the east. They're all Bronze Age and later, late Bronze Age, which implies that the culture was spreading. I'm looking at the camera and wondering if I'm going the right way. But the culture is spreading
downwards.
east, not west.
Oh, right.
That's okay. Now that's
changed everything round, doesn't it?
Yeah. Now, so when you start trying to unravel that, that's when things get really confusing, because all the other things that we know culturally have come from the east to the west. So
Nessa Brodgar. Let's go throw that in.
Yeah, well, Nessa. But the Nessa Brodgar, you're going to throw the spanner in the works. I mean, the Nessa Brodgar is old.
Yeah.
Old.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So we have this. So maybe. I don't know. See, it's all difficult, isn't it? Because you say the north of France is very corner area, very, very important. Nessa Brodgar, possibly older.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you're going to find the Nessa Brodgar is older. What's the date that they've given Stennis now?
Oh, I think we're looking. I can't remember now. I can't remember now.
As again, I make no apology for them. Well, I do apologize, but I don't feel guilty about the fact that I am terrible at remembering numbers.
Lots of things to remember, aren't there?
Yeah. I'm good at retaining concepts.
But I think we're talking about. I'm sure they said 6,000 BC for the actual Ness. The thing that they're uncovering. I kind of, that sticks in my mind. Can't be 6,000 BC, can it?
It can't be. That seems very old.
Yeah. But then when you've got
but it depends whether you're talking about. It depends whether you're talking about. I mean, that won't apply to any of the actual stonework, but if they're digging up, because there would have been Mesolithic inhabitants anyway.
What they're digging up there is a whole village, isn't it? Old stone village.
Yes, but that's not that old.
Blows your brain.
But I think that the thing that we need to take from it is that we can't look at it in terms of, or as if it's suggesting that that it started that way. That no, hang on, let me explain that in a better way. Look at more recent history, what we take for granted in terms of, say, the spread of Christianity across the world. That's all happened, obviously, in the last 2,000 years. And a huge amount of that only in the last 1,000 years. South America, one of the most Christian, in terms of population, places on the planet. And, well, Christianity wasn't taken there until 1492.
Wow.
And it was only 1525 that Rodrigo de Basdidas was landing on the shores of Colombia and spouting that, well, if they fought him and died, that it was their fault because they weren't welcoming the the word of God and all of this.
Yeah.
So the point is that all the culture that you know of in South America that we know predates by whatever you want to look at culturally. But where they are now, that Christianity, all the Christian churches have been taken there in the last 500 years.
Mm-hmm.
So if you apply that to any of the megalithic culture that you want to look at in Europe, that you had thriving cultures that were pre-existing, but suddenly this new way of doing things comes in from somewhere, and everybody adopts this way of being. It's amazing how we're very good as an animal. We're very good at allowing a new idea to completely change what we do and how we do it.
You're not kidding. We've noticed that since March.
Oh, with COVID, absolutely, absolutely. So sometimes it is very difficult to unravel these I say moments, but a lot of these transitions are moments in history that again we get these problems with terminology. We talk about the Mesolithic, the Neolithic, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and moving on. And the thing is that inevitably that causes in your head, it causes a division that, you can talk about something that's late Bronze Age, you still refer to it as Bronze Age, and something that's early Iron Age, you still refer to it as Iron Age, when there might be a century between them.
Yeah.
Whereas you've got 2,000 or 2,500 years of Bronze Age, that something can be early Bronze Age or late Bronze Age, and they're split by 2,000 years, but we still call them Bronze Age. So these things, these divisions in our heads are completely out the window.
Because you didn't stop one day and say, right, that's the Neolithic over. We're going into Bronze Age now. Okay, what else we're going to do from now on? So you could have got people. So we've got people all over Europe just being people, doing whatever they did. Yeah. And maybe then they started a particular type way of being, which involved standing stones started.
Well, you were asking about dolmens particularly, and I think that the thing about dolmens, I just thought of something else. It is also very fair to say, and an important point to make, that it is not at all true to say that dolmens are necessarily burial sites. They might be, but there are a huge amount of dolmens where no human remains have ever been found at all.
Then they're the ones that have just got the stones left. So everything's gone.
Everything's gone.
So there's no idea why they were there.
But you've also got the dilemma that we know that some dolmens were covered in soil to make a big earthen mound, but we also know that an awful lot of them very probably weren't. We know that there's places like Trethevi Quoit in Cornwall.
That was one I had in my mind.
Huge dolmen, and that wasn't covered in soil. And you can argue
how do we know?
Places. Well, they can tell from that it had an earthen bank that went up about halfway, and when you think about it, makes complete sense. Why are you going to make something so utterly flamboyant, so outrageously show off, look what we've done, and then cover it with an earth mound? What's the point? What is the point? The same applies to well, they might have created earthen mounds up to the point of the capstone. In fact, do you remember, bear with us folks, when you came down here and we were off having a look at sites?
We went up
together.
Into the mountain, into the hills there.
Well, do you remember?
I remember. Just throw this in. I remember those hogs. What are they called?
What? The sanglier?
The pig things.
What? The wild boar?
The warthogs.
Oh, wild boar.
Wild boar. That's the word. Yeah, small little wild boar triggering across, and I'm thinking.
Oh, the one that ran across the path. Yeah, that's
and
true.
I'm thinking.
Whole family.
Loads of little ones like this. There's going to be a big one soon. I can just see it. And you were, oh, it's okay, don't worry. I'm thinking, who's going to be able to run the fastest here, you know? Oh,
No,
don't worry about it. Wild boy. Sorry,
no,
go on. I digress.
It's all right. I do animals. I do. That's true. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, that was nice.
It was lovely, wasn't it? It's good.
But no, I was talking about the place. It's the biggest passage tomb in southern France, and you could call it a dolmen. And in fact, they do call it the Dolmen des Fades. It's the hill of the fairies. Now, the point about that, and the reason I bring that one up specifically, is that when you approach that site, all you can see is what looks like a dolmen. You know, you can see the capstone on the top of this hill. And it's only when you get to it that you see this unbelievable passage tomb. All you can see before that is the dolmen on the top. And so that you could so easily have had all manner of places where the dolmen was constructed and then the soil was built up just to leave that capstone exposed.
There's a place a bit like that in Northern Ireland where there's a whole dolmen and then there's a passage tomb or a sort of burial tomb coming off in the front of it. And I was looking at it thinking that would have to be a massive dome to do and to go over the top of it. So now you're saying that maybe they had a dolmen at one end and then they had a tomb coming out. Like you say, that burial tomb in the south of France is like that, isn't it? It's a huge area, sort of. That's a thought.
I think that's more likely.
So maybe they were. So why would they do it? What were they for?
Well, if you're
to stand on to.
I think that their roots are a lot more practical or pragmatic, anyway. Some years ago, when I was still living near London, my cat died, and I buried my cat in the back garden, and foxes dug my cat up 3 times, and so I kept on having to rebury the little bugger, and that made me wonder if. Did we start making dolmens for the elite? Because that way you were creating a burial site that was actually protecting the bodies as well. Maybe. I mean, I'm only making that up, but it's possible. I think the use of stones, putting a stone on top of a burial clearly is going to offer it some protection as well as marking the spot. And it's interesting, as I said, I'm making this up. There's no evidence to support this at all. But the thing is, if you just put a stone on top of a burial, then clearly wild animals, they'll smell meat and they could dig in from the sides or anything. So is that why they started making kists, which are basically a stone box in the ground, so that animals can't then dig in from all
that's
sides.
started in the Bronze Age, isn't it? So it was like...
So so that kind of makes sense to me. And the fact that it's only the elite that are being given their own burials, it does seem to make some kind of sense, I think.
There's a lot to be said. What time did we start having this conversation?
Hour and a half ago.
I think we'd better stop because we can carry on forever, can't we?
We could just nash all day.
I think we should do it again. And
happy to.
We'll have to. Otherwise, nobody's going to watch this for 2 hours, I think.
It's always good to see you, mate.
Yeah.
I think no, let's do it. I mean, see if people ask you questions, and I'm happy to do it again. And when all this lockdown madness is over, then
we'll get
we
together.
we can get together and do it over a beer. Do a
Yeah,
live one over a beer.
We missed our June meeting this year, didn't we?
We did.
We couldn't
Yeah.
I couldn't get down there.
Yeah.
It's been awful. I missed traveling down to the south of France. It's
yeah. I know. I was looking forward to seeing you. It's no, it's a shame. Well, I don't know. What can I say to all your viewers? I just hope you're all staying safe and well. And and you've enjoyed listening to us rabbit on for a while.
I wish we will do it again. So yeah, right. Yeah. So we'll say, well, thank you very much, Rupert. Is there anything we've mentioned? Your Standing with Stones. You've got website.
If you want to follow what Michael and I are doing on our YouTube channel, it's the Prehistory guys. And we're funded through our Patreon supporters as well, and just we're busy.
Brilliant.
It's lovely that so many people are really interested in prehistory.
Yeah, let's more the merrier. Let's bring it on.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Rupert. It's fantastic, and we'll
always a pleasure, my friend.
Chat soon as well. Okay, so I'll click this one. Say thank you, everybody else as well.
Take care, folks. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.